Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone to our monthly E3 Parent Summit. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Anna Aguilar, and I am one of three fabulous family liaisons, along with Carrie Sitka and Shannon Eves, here to support our families and staff at the Blue Ridge Academy. And it is such a privilege for us to do that. Our purpose for the E3 Parent Summit is to engage with our families, equip them with practical resources that they can use, and empower them to succeed on their journey in independent study with the Blue Ridge Academy. Today, for our E3 Summit, we will share valuable insight on everything you might need to know about Common Core. Sometimes it can be daunting, sometimes it can be overwhelming, but we have a wonderful speaker today that's going to be sharing and helping us understand Common Core and not being afraid of it, being overcomers. And that's why we're here today. We really appreciate you and your participation with us. To help our session run smoothly, we have a couple of requests before we begin this presentation. If you can, please keep your microphones muted and cameras off during the presentation to preserve bandwidth. We do have a really cool button that's a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and you can enter in questions as you have them. If they pop in your head, write them down. But at the end, we will have a time of Q&A. We will revert back to those questions, and we will go through those, as well as making it live where we can unmute your microphones and you can ask questions to our speaker as needed during that Q&A time at the end. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce to you our guest speaker and HST. I'm telling you, we have a fabulous and well-equipped group of HSTs with us at the Blue Ridge Academy. And Tiffany Kane is one of many, but we are so honored to have her today and have her sharing with us how to understand Common Core. And I'm going to let Tiffany take it away.
Probably should unmute myself if it's my turn to talk. Let me get my screen set up so you can see my presentation. So thank you so much, Anna. I appreciate you even asking me to do this. I'm really excited to share everything. This is a part, so it says presented by Tiffany Kane of Homeschool Planning Systems, and I left that there because it's an important piece of kind of my history and how I got here and why I started learning about the Common Core standards in the first place. So before I was an HST, I had a little business where I was coaching homeschooling parents. That business does not exist anymore, but that is where this whole presentation originated, and I just wanted to leave it there. If you look for Homeschool Planning Systems right now, you will not find it. That website is no longer hosted, so you won't see it. But it's just a nod to my prior self, my previous self, who came up with this in the first place. So I wanted to talk a little bit today, or just start out by talking. Now, Anna said we have the Q&A button at the bottom, and I asked her to add that because we're going to be using the chat today for some interactive things. I can't see everybody. I see lots of names and lots of mute buttons, but I want to know you're there. So throughout the presentation, there will be times where I'll have put up a question slide, and I'll just say, put your answer in the chat. I wanted to talk a little bit about my educational philosophy. So here's who I am. I've been a teacher since I was 3. Before I even went to school, I would put the stuffed animals on the bed, and I was the teacher, and I was teaching them how to do things. I always loved school. I loved everything about school. And I was aware that other people didn't, and I always thought that was very strange. You know, I was the kid who stayed in at recess to help the teacher file things and all of those things. And my personal belief, is that school should be about exploring different ways to learn so you can discover the way that works best for you. And so what I would like for you to do right now is, here's our first question. So if you could open up your chat and answer this question. In your expert opinion, and I do believe we are all experts, right? We have all had our own educational experience. You wouldn't be here if you weren't trying to help educate somebody else. What is your educational philosophy? So can you just take a couple minutes and put your answer in the chat, please? I'm waiting. I'm looking. And you don't have to type fast. I get it. I'm a terrible typer. Wait, is anybody here? What do you think school should be about? Oh, I love that, Anna. Developing a love of learning because we're not robots. Hands-on, Amy, I love that too, with a focus on literature. Good. Finding what works for each student, agreed. Student-led learning, huge. Every student be able to reach their highest potential, amazing. Perfect. There's more coming in. A safe space where students can be successful. Thank you, Julie. That's great. Okay, you can keep putting things in the chat if you'd like. I'm going to move on. So I'm wondering, and have you ever had a time where you went to IKEA and you came home and you had this big box of stuff, right? And you had the one way to think about it is to look at all the details. When you look at all the details, you're talking about the nuts and the screws and I forget what these little dowel things are called, right? So when we're talking about the Common Core standards, that's what we're talking about, or at least that's how most people see it. You look at it and you think of these individual standards, like the student can do this, the student can do that, and it's this little tiny piece of information. And when you count, and we're just talking about ELA and math, if you counted all of them, there are 999 individual standards. Well, who in the world is ever going to remember what all those standards are? Nobody. Not me either. Oh, something just bumped. Is my thing still showing, Anna? I got a weird notification sound. Can you guys all see me? Okay.
We can see you and hear you. You're great.
Perfect. Thank you. I heard a weird noise on my computer. So when we're talking about the Common Core standards, that's a lot. Who's ever going to remember 999 of them? No one. So when I was thinking about this, I want to go back to thinking about the standards and what got me started and why I started looking at this. I was looking at all these little standards, or not little standards, they're big standards, but all these many standards. And I was saying there has to be some way that they're all connected. And I wanted to see the big picture. So when we're thinking about IKEA, the big picture is when you're actually looking at the picture of the shelf, right? We're not looking at the screws anymore. We're not looking at the nails. We're not looking at the actual shelf. We're looking at the whole big picture of that shelf. And we can start to see how those things are put together. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take a big picture look first at the standards, and then we're going to go back to looking at the little individual details. So before I was an HST, I've been a preschool director. I was a classroom teacher for grades 3 through 8. I was the academic dean at a Catholic high school, and I was a lecturer for undergraduates at the university level. So when I say I have a unique perspective, that's because that's how I like to think about things. Again, I like to see the big picture and how it all fits and works together. So here's the other thing I told you earlier, I loved school, and then I had this child and he hated school. He hated school. It was awful. And that's why we finally decided to homeschool after 2nd grade. It was just torture getting him to go to school. Picking him up from school was no fun at all. And homeschooling is hard. And so when I would tell people I was homeschooling, on the outside, they would see a highly qualified educator and everyone had faith in me. But on the inside, that was a different story, right? I had a lot of fear and I had a lot of doubt and I had a lot of frustration. So for all of the parents who are here today, I understand this big leap of faith that you have to take when you decide to homeschool. And so while I was going through all of that, Dawn Gordon, who is here today, was actually my HST, and I loved her. I still love her. And we were talking about
Tiffany.
we were talking about
I'm here to support you.
She knows my frustration because we tried so many different curriculums. We tried so many different things. And finally, one day I went in my kitchen and I took out everything I had in my possession from when I was still teaching in the classroom, and I put it all on the kitchen table. And then I sorted it out and I created this whole system. I'm like, Dawn, you got to come see what I made. And she really encouraged me. She's like, oh my gosh, our parents need you. I'm like, well, how do I teach them what I know? And so that was how Homeschool Planning Systems got started. And it was this 8-week class that I took parents through. We're not going to have time, obviously, to do all of that, but I just want to give you kind of how this presentation even came to be, okay? So in the first week, we dealt with the triangle, and we talked about what is your purpose? What is your reason for homeschooling in the first place? what are your strengths, and what are your child's interests? And we kind of made you would always take a little, like a triangle like this, right? Like, this is your viewfinder. Everything you do in homeschooling has to fit in this triangle. You've got your child's interests, your strengths, and it's meeting your purpose. You're going to win every time. So that was the first week. The second week, we talked about knowing what counts. We talked about, what is language arts? What is math? What is science? What is social studies? So language arts is about communicating with other people. It could be through speaking, it could be through listening, it could be through writing, right? We've got the ins and we've got the outs. What is math? Well, math is about learning about the world around you and using numbers to quantify that. Science is about learning the physical aspects of our world, and social studies is about the social aspects of our world. So again, that was a whole 3-hour class, but that's just to give you the overview. And then we talked about understanding mastery, and we would go through all of the stages of Bloom's taxonomy: knowledge, understanding, application, analysis, synthesis, and then evaluation. So that was a whole nother class. And then we talked about academic thinking skills. Again, I know I'm going through this really quickly. If you have more questions about it, we can talk about it later, or you can email me anytime. But academic thinking skills, where we talked about, so it's about observing, and then comparing and contrasting is the next one, and ordering, and then observing patterns, or recognizing patterns, I should say, predicting, organizing, and then finally planning. And then the last part, or the circle, is about motivation, and we talked about information processing theory, behavioral theories, and cognitive theories of motivation. Then we go through that whole class, and the parents would be like, but I still don't know what I'm supposed to teach my kid. And I was like, oh, okay. And that's when I started exploring the standards. But anyway, that's where the logo came from. That's what I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'm getting so excited. I can feel myself talking really fast. So I'm going to take a deep breath, and I'm going to slow down for a minute. Hold on. That was when I started learning about the Common Core standards. So, and there was a lot of controversy around them. The other thing that's really important to know is that when California adopted the Common Core standards, I wasn't in a professional teaching position for those few years. I was at home, and I was having my child, and I was getting married and doing a whole bunch of other things. So I never got formally trained. And so now I'm homeschooling my kid, and I'm like, I want to know what these things are, right? So this is the actual definition from the corestandards.org. So the Common Core state standards are a clear set of shared goals and expectations for the knowledge and skills students need in English language arts and mathematics at each grade level, so they can prepare to succeed in college, career, and life. Well, that's a mouthful, right? And what I learned when I was learning about the Common Core standards is that there was a history. So they didn't even come to pass until 2007. So they're still fairly new. I'm old, so 2007 doesn't seem like it was that long ago. And prior to that, we had the college and career readiness standards, and we also had the K-12 standards. So the Common Core standards was a way to try and bring all of that together. And in 2010, that was the year that California adopted the Common Core standards. And there was a lot of controversy around them, right? Some people thought they were more demanding. Some people were on the side of it was an intrusion of the federal government, and we wanted state control over the education. And there were lots of worries connected to high-stakes standardized testing. And that was my thing, too. I was like, oh, anyway, we're not going to get, that's a whole nother presentation. We're not going to talk about that today. So the answer I would like you to put in the chat now is, what are your current thoughts, feelings, and understandings and questions about the Common Core standards? So all of you here are either teachers or parents, and you've dealt with the Common Core standards for a number of years now. What are your thoughts, feelings, and understandings about the Common Core standards as you've experienced them so far? So go ahead and put your answer in the chat. And more people are here. Oh, you're typing. Anybody? There we go. Yay. Present information in different ways. Okay, that's the way the Common Core standards are been implemented. Many of them are not clear in their meaning. Okay, good. I had some confusion about that too, Barry. Anybody else want to add something to the chat? Common Core standards tried to align to specific skills to grade levels. That's true. So much more like building blocks. Some people are stressed. It's confusing, not mastery, just introductory. That is confusing. I understand why that's confusing too. Okay, good. Well, we're going to talk about all of those things. So I'm excited. We're on the right track. So when you're using Common Core, if you're a parent and you're using the Common Core standards to homeschool, this is the way I always like to think about it. I have 3 buckets. So when I'm looking at the Common Core standards, the first bucket of standards go into, I've got this. I know what that means. It's in plain English. I can completely help my child do that. No problem. These are the things, that's the first bucket. Those are the ones I can do. The second bucket is, I think I know what that means. I can learn this either just ahead of or with my child. We're going to go on a learning adventure together. Those are the things that those are the ones that we're going to work on. And it's going to be okay, but I'm not 100% sure. The last one is, okay, that standard is way above my pay grade. I have no idea what we need. I don't know how to do it. We need a tutor, and then that's where I'm going to spend my educational funds, right? So most of the time, that's where I spent a lot of my funds is when it was something that either I knew I couldn't teach my kid or something that I just really wasn't interested in teaching him. Like I knew somebody else could do it better, right? So those are the 3 buckets when you're thinking about the standards. The other thing I want you to think about is, when I was becoming an educational psychologist, one of the first things I would ask, if somebody came to me with a problem and they said, this child is not performing, the first question I would ask myself is this a matter of skill or is it a matter of will? If it's a matter of skill, then it's easy to assess. Either you can do it or you can't, right? It's teachable. Skills are amazing because they're teachable. And as long as there's no other neurological or anatomical reason why the student can't do it, right? But if it was to do with will, then you're talking about a student's motivation, and there's a lot more factors. It can be hard to find a solution. So what I like about the Common Core standards and what kind of turned me around to really liking them is that they are skill-based. And that's what's so great. The other thing is they do show a progression, and we're going to get to that in just a little bit. So normally when people look at the Common Core standards, why isn't this going? You see, here's the grade level, here's standard 1, here's standard 2, here's standard 3, etc. Right? Well, as I was looking at, so what I did was I printed out the whole thing. It's like I was going to bring it today, I forgot. It's a big, thick, like 2 or 3 inch binder. And they're all in there. And as I was reading, I'm like, some of that looks familiar, but how is that different than the last one? And I thought, you know what? I want to see it. Instead of looking at by grade level, I want to look at it by standard. And then I want to see it, like, what does that standard say for kindergarten? What does that standard say for first grade? What does that standard say for second grade? And that was when the light bulb went on, because you really can see the progression of each standard. So we're going to go through some of them here in just a minute. But I want to also, before we do that, I keep saying, we're going to do that, we're going to do that. But I want to make sure we understand the structure. So within English language arts and mathematics, those are the 2 main things that there are Common Core standards for. There aren't actually, when it comes to science and social studies, there are not separate standards for those. We have other standards that we use in our school and in the state. But when it comes to the Common Core standards, those are not the standards we use necessarily for science and social studies. There are, however, science and social studies standards woven into the English language arts standards. So within the English language arts standards, there are different domains. There are 4 domains to be exact. There's reading, there's writing, there's speaking and listening, and there's language. So as long as you know about those 4 big domains, that will help you categorize, like, what do we actually need to be working on? Within reading, there are only 10 standards. Within writing, there are only 10 standards. Within speaking and listening, there are only 6 standards. And within language, there are only 6 standards. But at the beginning, I told you there were 999. And now I'm telling you there's really only 32. So how can that be? Well, because when you look at them for each grade level, right, and you're looking at each individual piece, and then within some of them, they actually have pieces and parts. So if you actually counted every single one, there are 999 because I counted. In reading, there are a few other standards, but they're not actually really numbered, but those are the foundational reading standards, and those are the standards about learning how to read. Most of these other standards are about reading to learn, okay? All right, so within the reading standards, we have foundational skills, and within foundational skills, there's print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and that goes through K through 5, okay? And there's one more. There's also fluency, that's K through 5. And again, we're going to look at these in a minute, and you'll be able to see the progression of them. Then the next part of the English language standards are key ideas and details. There actually are 3 standards. Standards 1 through 3 are in the key ideas and details category. So we've got, there's 3. Then we've got craft and structure, and then we've got integration of knowledge and ideas. So we've got 3 standards here. We've got standards 4 through 6 here. We've got standards 7 through 9 here. And then the last one is the range of reading and level of text complexity. And that really just means that they're working at their grade level, that the things that they are reading about are grade level specific. Again, this will make more sense as we go through. We're just looking at the structure right now. Let's look at the actual standards within that first category of key ideas and details. So standard 1 is to read closely to determine what the text says explicitly and to make logical inferences from it. And you want to be able to cite specific textual evidence. So that means when the student is actually reading, or when the child is actually reading, they can tell you when it says, anytime you see explicitly, tells you exactly what it says in what they read. It's not what they think it means. That's the making logical inferences, right? So the 2 parts of reading for standard number 1 are being able to read the words, know what the words mean. And the second part is being able to make meaning from what they're reading. Does that make sense? Standard number 2 is about finding central ideas or themes. So can you summarize? Can you tell me what this whole big thing is about? Can you tell me what you're reading, what it is about? Okay. And then the third one is about looking at the pieces of the pie. What are the different pieces of what you're reading? Who are the characters? What happens in the story? What are the ideas? And how do those things develop over time? Okay? We're going to spend a little bit of time on English language arts, and then we'll get to math. So the craft and structure standards are like this. So now we want to be able to interpret the words that they're reading. And this is about understanding how specific words make a difference to the meaning of what they're actually reading. Standard 5 is about looking at the structure of the text, right? So how is the text set up? What comes first? If we're talking about the really littles, right? The beginning, middle, end. What is the structure? How is that story set up? How is that piece of writing set up? Giving you the framework, or giving them the framework to understand what those are. And the last one in this section is about understanding the point of view of the person who's writing it, right? I think in this world, it's really important to understand what is the point of view of the person who's writing this, and what is it they want me to think, right? And do I really think that? So that's where the standard number 6 is. Now, the integration of knowledge and ideas, standard number 7, looking at learning different formats, right? These are some of my favorite assignments, where you can read a book and then watch the movie. And what's the same and what's different, right? Anytime you're looking at the content to see how it's similar and how it's different, that's where you're looking at integrating and evaluating the content. Delineate and evaluate. So again, going back to that last one I just talked about, is what this thing that I'm reading, what is it? No, hold on, let me say this. Is this piece of writing that I am reading, does it make logical sense, right? I know I have, this is just a weird little story, but I have, my mom was from Scotland, and one of her sisters, her oldest sister, she believed everything that was written in the newspaper, because if it was written down, it must be true, right? Well, that's not necessarily true anymore with all of the different ways we can read and get information, right? So this is about really making sure, does it make sense? Is what I'm reading making sense to me? And then Two or more texts address similar themes. So this is important when we get to especially like history or my favorite for little kids is there's a book called The True Story of the Three Little Pigs. And it's told from the wolf's point of view, right? So we all know this story, but what about when we look at it from the wolf's point of view or looking at the same story or the same events from another person's perspective? That's what standard number 9 is all about. And then what I told you about standard number 10 is that are they reading independently and proficiently? And does it make sense? Is it complex enough for their grade level? So let me show you what I mean by the progression. So, and we're going to talk about these little codes in a little bit too, but for right now, so this is the first standard for reading literature. Read closely to determine what the text says explicitly. I've already said this before, but I know I'm talking fast. And make logical inferences from it. Cite specific textual evidence in writing or speaking to support conclusions drawn from the text. Okay, that's a lot of words. But here's what it looks like. So in kindergarten, this standard says, with prompting and support, ask and answer questions about key details in the text. Well, we can do that, right? Of course. Can we read a story and can my child then ask and answer questions about what happened in the story? So sometimes it's a lot of words to really say something very simple. But this is where it gets magical. Okay, so that's what it looks like for kindergarten. This is what it looks like for first grade. It's strangely familiar, isn't it? That's all it is. The only difference is we take off the with prompting and support. And now they're working more independently. That's the thing with these standards is as you work through them, what we're asking the student to do is to act more independently. We want them to be able to think broader and deeper as they get older. Number 2, oh my gosh, now ask and answer questions. It's the same thing. Who, what, where, why, how. Now we're just getting more specific about the key details in the text. Right? So here we have 1, 2, 3 standards, but really they're all just this one. This is where the 999 comes from. Because as you go through them, ask and answer questions to demonstrate an understanding of a text, referring explicitly to the text for the basis of the answers. So that means when the student is answering the question, can you tell me exactly what it said in the text to help me answer this question? That's all it is. Okay, so do you see, go ahead and put something in the chat if you've never seen them in this order before, if it never made sense to you before. Because to me, this was mind-blowing. It was just, oh my gosh, when I look at it in order, it changes everything. So here's the thing I was talking about before too. When it comes to the reading standards, there are reading standards for reading literature, reading informational text, reading history and social studies, and reading science and technical subjects. So, remember I told you there are 10 reading standards? There are 10 reading standards for reading literature. It's the same 10 reading standards, but they're for reading of informational text. There's the same 10 reading standards, but it's for reading social studies. It's the same 10 standards, but it's reading science and technical subjects. So, once you know what those 10 basic standards are, and you understand that there's actually just a progression, for me, I don't know about you, but hopefully for you, it gave me a huge sigh of relief. It's like, oh, I can do this. So here's a grade level example for reading for grade 6, reading standard number 1. So read closely to determine what it's the same thing, right? Determine what the text says explicitly and make logical inferences from it. We've seen this now. Cite specific textual evidence in writing or speaking to support conclusions drawn from the text. So in literature, information, history, and social studies, these are all the grade 6 standards, right? Standard number 1. In literature, this is what it says. Cite textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. That's the reading literature standard for 6th grade, standard number 1. Now let's look at the information. It's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same standard. This is why they're so confusing, because there's so many of them, and a lot of them are repeating. Okay, so what about social studies? Let's see if it's different for social studies. Oh, so for social studies, it is a little different because we want to look at primary and secondary sources. What about science? Oh, yeah, well, it's just what we're reading is that's changing, right? So when it comes to history and social studies, what we're reading is what changes. The standards don't change, okay? If you can give me, does anybody, if you have something you'd like to say, go ahead and put it in the chat. Hopefully that was mind-blowing, as mind-blowing for you as it was for me. Now, I have a bunch, I'm looking at the time already. I have a bunch of examples. I might go through these pretty quickly because I do want to get to math and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So the writing standards, it's the same kind of setup, right? There's 10 writing standards. The first 3 standards are about text types and purposes. The next 3 standards are about production and distribution of writing. That means like, can you get your writing ready to publish and share what you've written, share your ideas with other people? And how do you do research, right? How do you find what you want to write, find what you want to learn about, and then writing so that you can, as a process for helping you learn more. Like I can tell you, going through this whole process helped me learn the standards more, right? And then range of writing, again, is more just about making sure that it works at their grade level. So I'm going to skip through some of this, but I want to just show you really quickly. I knew this was going to happen. I always have more than I have time to present. But I see somebody put, I wish they were laid out like that. I have a magical document that I'm going to share with you at the end of this that does do exactly that. So, okay, so here, just give you the example for writing. I just want to show you the progression, right? So this is the first standard for writing. Write arguments to support claims in an analysis of substantive topics or texts using valid reasoning and relevant and sufficient evidence. Well, that's a lot for a kindergartner, right? So kindergartner, we're going to ask them to use a combination of drawing, dictating, and writing to compose opinion pieces in which they tell a reader the topic, the name of the book they are writing about, and state an opinion or preference about the topic or book. Kindergartners have opinions just like everybody else. Sometimes they have a lot more than everybody else, right? But then first grade, so now we're not depending as much on the drawing and the dictating. Now we're asking them to actually write out the name of the book they're writing, state an opinion, and supply a reason, one reason, right? Now we want them to supply more reasons in second grade, more than one reason. Does this make sense? Hopefully this is making sense to everybody. And then in third grade, this is what I was talking about, how sometimes they have parts and pieces. So when you pull these apart, that actually adds into the 999 standards too. But again, you can see as we go through the grade levels, it's just getting a little bit more complicated each time. We're just asking them to do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, right? Like this one in third grade, they should be having concluding statements with everything they write. They have to have an opinion, provide their reasons, use linking words, and have a conclusion, right? And then we're not going to go on to fourth grade. And again, the writing, there are writing standards, but in reading, remember there were standards for social studies and then there were standards for science. In writing, it's just all together. There's writing standards and then the social studies, science, and technical subjects all get lumped together. And again, I'm going to skip through this because I think you've seen it now. Oh, this is what I wanted to show you on this slide here. So here for this one, you'll see it says NA. These standards are typically addressed in 6 through 12. So those standards for that go in the Common Core for science and social studies don't actually start until 6th grade. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying we don't have standards for science and social studies, but there aren't Common Core reading and writing standards for social studies and science until 6th grade. We have other standards for that. Okay, I'm unfortunately not going to be able to talk about those today. Okay, so I'm going to go through. I'm going to just do this really quickly. These slides will be available to you afterwards, so you can go through them. I want to make sure we have enough sufficient amount of time to talk about math. So I'm sorry I'm skipping through Okay, so let's talk about how to read the codes. So in reading, as I told you, there's reading foundations. So that's what RF stands for, reading literature, RL, reading information, RI, reading history and social studies, RH, RST, science and technical subjects. Then we've got writing, history, science and technical subjects, speaking and listening and language. So when you look at the code, this is what you see, right? So this first part right here, that's the standard domain. So that's telling you that this is reading for literature. And this first number is telling you the grade level, and this number is telling you the standard. So remember, at only 1 through 10, that's all there is for reading and literature. There's only 10 standards, okay? Okay, so how will understanding the structure of the ELA standards change the way you work with them? Please put your answer in the chat. Anybody? Are you guys still with me? Did everybody leave? Is that the number? Is that the words that people are hearing? Is people leaving? I hope not. Are you finding the structure helpful? Oh, I hope I didn't lose people. Oh, yes, thank you. Okay, thank you. Somebody's still here. Very good. Okay, now here's the other one I wanted to go through. I want to make sure we have some time to talk about mathematics. So while the ELA structure is very, we've got these are the main domains, and here's these standards, and these standards go through all the different grade levels and through the different domains. Math is not set up like that because math and language don't work the same in our brains, right? I like the growing components like a letter. Thank you, Alan. So the ELA structure, there's 4 domains. In math, there's 16. So already it seems like, oh no, it's going to be a little more complicated. But once I show you the map I made, you'll change your mind. So in ELA, it's the same standards every year. The skills are increasing in complexity each year. But with math, the domains build on each other. So we have some domains that we address in kindergarten and first grade that we don't address again, right? So they change as the kids get older. So the math codes, this is what they are. Remember, we just did that list of the language arts ones. So we've got counting and cardinality, which is about counting actual things and putting them in order, more by size sometimes, right? Putting things in order. Geometry, we know that's about shapes. Operations and algebraic thinking, that's when we make substitutions within our different equations that we're using. Number operations base 10, that really is about place value, okay? And that's going to be really important when we look at this map in a minute, understanding that that's about place value. Measurement and data is about understanding graphs and things like that. Number operations fractions, that's where, when we get to the map, I want to talk a little bit about fractions and why I have some theories about that. It's not proven, it's just in my own head. Expressions and equations, ratios and proportional relationships, the number system, statistics and probability. I can tell you right now, next time I do this, I'm going to separate this out. But from expressions and equations up to statistics and probability, those are all the middle school standards. And then we've got the high school standards down here. Functions, high school algebra, high school functions, high school number and quantity, high school statistics, and high school geometry. So this is what the map looks like. Okay, I did not see this anywhere. This is just from reading the standards and me understanding how they all fit together. So I did it in grade bands because this is kind of how they felt. So counting and cardinality, that's the first standards that we approach, and that's in kindergarten through 2nd grade. And then we have operations and algebraic thinking that starts in, I think it's 1st grade and goes all the way to 5th grade. That's all the things that you normally think about when you think about math, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, right? Understanding how those operators work with numbers. The next one we have is number operations base 10. Again, there are standards for that go from 1st grade all the way to 5th grade. And then we've got measurement and data goes from 1st grade to 5th grade as well. And then geometry goes all the way through. Sorry, I thought this one was going to be next. Number operations fractions. You'll notice that number operations fractions falls underneath number operations base 10. If a child does not have their place value understanding really solid, and then you try to teach them fractions, it's going to get really confusing. So when it's different, I mean, how this is different than language arts is how in language arts, it just gets a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder. Again, this is what I meant by in math, it builds on it. So if they don't know their place value and you try to do fractions, almost every adult I know who says they don't like math, I ask them, this is just my own personal survey, when did you start hating math? How old were you? And invariably they'll say, oh no, probably around third grade. Third grade is when we introduce fractions. So my own personal, like, again, it's not verified data. It's just my hunch. Okay. Then let's move on to middle school. So expressions and equations is an outgrowth of operations and algebraic thinking. So if they haven't mastered these standards and they get to middle school and you're trying to do expressions and equations, it's going to be really hard to do if these have not been mastered. Okay, the number system also, it comes from, it's an outgrowth of these place value standards. Ratios and proportional relationships, it's an outgrowth of fractions. If they don't understand fractions, they're going to have a really hard time with ratios. Measurement and data is going to be statistics and probability. So that's kind of how they all work together. I don't imagine there's a lot of high school, by the time people, and then functions do get introduced in 8th grade. But by the time we get to high school, most of the homeschooling parents I know, they're in their third bucket. They're like, okay, that's above my pay grade. We're hiring somebody else to teach that. But this is where the high school ones fall on the map. So algebra and functions are an outgrowth of operations and algebraic thinking. High school number and quantity all come from this place value and fractions and ratio. That's where these ones all fall together. Uh-oh, we hit the button too soon. Statistics comes from this measurement and data, statistics and probability, and then of course, geometry comes from geometry. So that is how that makes sense. And of course, the structure is different and how you read the label is different too. Remember the first time we had the letters first. So in math, we've got the grade level first. Then we've got the standard domain. This is measurement and data. And then this is the standard category. There's different categories within the different domains. And then this is the standard number. So that's a little bit, again, math is very different than English and language arts. So here's this question. How will this structure of mathematics standards change the way you work with them? Anybody? That math map was magical to me as well. The first time I saw the progression of the language arts, and then when I started to put together and look at the standards and see how they all fit together for math, I was mind blown. So I'm hoping that that was something interesting for you as well. Okay, nobody's chatting with me. That's okay. So I have 2 documents for you that will be available in the slides. The first one is a Google Doc, which I'm going to show you. If you have a Gmail address, this is the one I suggest you do. It's going to ask you to make your own copy, and it's a lot easier to navigate. So again, if you have a Gmail address, I would go with the Google Doc because it is a lot easier to navigate. Please keep in mind, I am a terrible typist, and I had to retype all of these because there was no place that I could copy and paste them and rearrange them. So if you see typos, I apologize. And I'm afraid I'm going to click this, and it's going to take me to make a copy, but that's okay. Let me just, so this is what should happen. You should press on it. It should ask you to make a copy. And then it's taking a minute, maybe because I'm here. Here's how the easiest way to navigate this document, if in fact you would like to have this document, is I like to view over here. I like to view the table of contents. I made all the headings so that it would be easy to navigate. And you can see it's 144 pages. This is not a little tiny document, right? But it goes through, and you can see all the different, that's math. This is the table of contents for language arts. Let's look at, let's go to key ideas and details. If you click somewhere over here, also, it will take you right to that page. So here it is all the way from from kindergarten all the way down to 12th grade, this is what standard number 1 looks like. So you can see for reading literature, standard number 1, this is how that standard progresses. And then if we scroll down, now a lot of times, like I think I said this, but I want to make sure it's really clear. So the standards remain the same. There are the same 10 standards. And in reading, what changes is what they are reading. So we've got reading for literature. So this is more about stories. And then we've got reading for information. This is about informational text. And then here they are, the ones for social studies. Remember, I told you they start from 6th grade, they go to 12th grade. The other thing that's cool about these is that they're in bands. So a lot of the high school ones, you'll see it says 9-10, because that's for 9th and 10th grade. They have 2 years to understand that. And this is for 11th and 12th grade. They have 2 years to get to that level of mastery. Okay. So anyway, so this is available to you. And I think what I want to do now, look, God, I can't believe I talked for so long and you're all still here. So I think, Anna, let's go to I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now. And Anna, I'll hand it back to you. Maybe we can go through some Q&A and see what people want to know.
Thank you so much, though. I just feel like my mind has exploded, but at the same time, it just narrowed. It just made it just a lot easier to understand. And I'm a visual person, so having those numbers and having it broken down was great. And I think in math, it's so correct how I was going to put it's building blocks, but I think that it's a reminder of how important the foundation, setting that foundation is to be able to excel and exceed in the next grades above. So, and hey, it's okay if we have to go back and work on those fractions and make sure we're solid on them before we can continue to move up. So, wow, this was great. And again, for those of you that are here and those of you who may be watching this recording, the slides will be available. And I really love being able to click on those links and have that like readily visually available.
Yeah.
I don't see anything in the Q&A.
Okay, good.
That is okay. What we can do now is if anyone has a question, you're welcome to use the reaction button and raise your hand, and then we can call on you, or just, I mean, we're kind of a smaller group right now. You can unmute yourself and ask a question, or give her any comments or feedback. I think that's really important as well. But we're so appreciative of this. I think that this is going to really help as we get into our testing periods and those things coming up. Being able to be equipped with this information is really helpful.
Good. I'm glad. I hope, like I said, I hope it can be helpful. Yeah, do you want to stop recording now? Is that what you tell me how you do it, or it's up? I don't know. Just want to make sure we're doing it.
I actually, I can stop the recording if anyone would prefer to ask questions outside. Again, I think we've answered all the questions. I will look in the chat one more time. There's just a lot of thank yous. We do have a question. How do we access that PDF?
You know what? I'm going to put, I was going to just leave it in the slide, but I'll put it in the chat right now.
And I just wanted to let also those watching the recording will also go along with the slides. So that will be put up on our E3 Parent Summit document page. And so again, that's always readily available on our Facebook, on our handbook, both the student handbook, staff handbook, and on our Parent Information Center. So you would look on that E3 Summit, Parent Summit, you'll see all of the past recordings, all of the past seminars that we've done, and then you'll see this one along with the slides, so you can kind of be able to do that. But thank you for attaching them here so that we have that readily available too. Thank you.
So they're in the chat. Very good. And again, anytime I do them, I always have way more information than I have time to share. So I'm sorry I went through some of those kind of quickly, but I think just understanding, like I said, being able to see the progression and knowing how the math standards fit together, those were the two biggest things for me that were like, whoa, that's so cool.
Absolutely. I'm going to turn off the recording just so that anyone can ask questions as they need.